Ginawang panunutok ng laser light ng isang Chinese vessel sa isa nating barko sa sarili nating teritoryo.
You have any images that shows clearly, no, na hinaharas talaga tayo at binubuli tayo dyan sa West Philippine Sea, ilabas mo yan, di ba? Para wala ng plausible deniability yung kabila, para wala ng denial, no? Para alam natin na ano yung katotohanan talaga on the ground.
Another encounter in disputed waters. The Philippine Coast Guard calls out its Chinese counterpart over aiming a military-grade laser light on a Navy ship or Coast Guard ship twice. The Philippine Coast Guard says the light caused temporary blindness to some crew members aboard a Filipino ship. What makes this Chinese action different from the others or the other past aggressions of Ayungin Shoal? We discuss in this episode of the Chiefs. Welcome to the Monday edition of the Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao, and with me in the studio, Robbie Lapay of One News. And online, we have Ana Marie Pamintuan, the editor-in-chief of the Philippine Star. Ami, Robbie, happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Okay, daming putok na storya ngayon.
Oo nga.
Maliban dun sa China, Chinese Coast Guard with the Philippine Coast Guard, which is unusual because usually it's a militia with with the Filipino fishermen. Now, Coast Guard to Coast Guard. And the other one is yung declaration ni BBM. Ni PBBM na charter change is not a priority.
Not a priority, yes.
That's coming
Ang
from...
mga priority niya yung RCEP,
Yeah.
Maharlika, at saka yung ROTC.
Yeah.
So, ayan.
But of course, Ami, the irony there is that this is coming from the candidate who run as a candidate of the Partido Federal,
Yes.
which of course was pushing for.
Yeah, but that's a party is a party.
Party, well, that's also true. But if you don't point it out, then it becomes really normal.
But something interesting
Pero
also.
key member ng party na nawala na, remember, into his first quarter ng kanyang wala na.
Something that's not in the headlines, or at least not for hindi natin headline yan, but interesting. We talked about it sa big story. The Department of Justice wanting to change the standard for preliminary investigation from probable cause to certainty of conviction.
That's the new standard they want.
That's what they want.
Certainty of conviction. That's quite difficult.
So there has obviously, they say the objectives here is to unclog the dockets, also put a little bit more pressure on our police and investigators and prosecutors for that matter na punta kayo dito pagka talagang may ebidensya. But I imagine a lot of debates and unintended consequences here also that people will have to look at.
That's something very interesting to talk about kasi certainty of conviction, that's
sabi niya nga, it basically, kanina kausap natin ang presidente ng IVP. And he was saying, that will bring it just a notch below the unreasonable doubt standard at the court.
And you're talking
Pero
about
para naman yung di ba? Para mag-ingat din yung police, di ba? Dahil napakarami namang cases na nadi-dismiss talaga. Kung technicality, di ba?
Kaya makikita natin dito, I mean, we see both sides. We're just saying this will make for a fascinating, if not a long drawn-out conversation.
Yeah. Okay, but that's also going to make it more difficult for people to bring things to court.
Yes.
Much more difficult.
That's true. But
Konting ingat, di ba?
You also asked the question, therefore, still, di ba? Parang, what will it mean for, well, so let's face it, a lot of politically motivated charges also. Our justice system has that many flaws. Then how will it work also? As we say, there are two justice systems working in the country. How will it work for the haves and the have-nots?
We should program an episode around that.
Separate episode, yes.
Yeah, that'll sound interesting. Anyway, we speak to our first guest right after this short break, so please stay with us. another apparent act of aggression. The Chinese Coast Guard points a laser to at a Filipino patrol vessel off the Philippine neighbor, the Philippine Coast Guard. Anyway, we'll check with that.
Coast Guard.
Coast Guard. Let's discuss with maritime law expert Professor J. Batongbakal. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome back to the Chiefs.
Ay, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat.
Magandang gabi.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Doc, for the longest time, karamihan ng kiskisan doon sa West Philippine Sea are, Chinese militia and local fishermen. Now we're having, Coast Guard to Coast Guard. Is this unusual, and what does this mean?
Well, it's not new. It's just that it has not been so quickly reported before. No? Coast Guard to Coast Guard interaction was happening even before. No? But what is unusual about this latest one is that, well, for me, it's an apparent escalation in a way. No? Kasi they used a laser which produced effects on the subject vessel. No? And it has been part of a parang progressive and slow intensification of their moves, their assertive actions in the West Philippine Sea. If you look at the incidents over the past couple of years, well, all started with just verbal warnings, then dangerous maneuvers, then as also reported by the Coast Guard, this year it crossed into showing off guns, and pointing them at one point, according to and then now you have a laser being actually used to lace the Coast Guard vessel, which caused temporary blindness on the part of the bridge crew, no? And because of that, they were forced to abort, no? Malayo pa lang ginamitan na. So for me, this is actually part of a pattern that I observed of this slow and incremental escalation in their actions there.
Professor, we do want to get into the pattern. That's really the more important thing here. But pasensya na, stupid question to you and maybe to you, Red Book. Mas alam mo to. What does that mean? Military grade laser. At least that's how it was reported. What exactly does that mean?
Baka alam ni Prof. Kasi military grade anybody can grade, grade something.
Dagdagan ko na yun sa
Yeah,
ibang tao, inilawan lang naman daw yung ating barko kasi madilim.
Hindi.
Sabi ng iba.
Probably this is to distinguish it from yung mga commercial na lasers like your laser pointer, which is probably only a few milliwatts in intensity.
Yeah.
At saka yung mga laser na ginagamit sa mga light show, yung mga like theaters or stages, di ba? Those are also low-grade lasers. Pag military grade, ibig sabihin mas malakas siya, mas malayo ang abot, no? At saka meron, gaya nga nung report ng Coast Guard, it produces actual effects, no? In this case, a temporary blindness.
Ito, kita mo layo ng barko pero malakas pa rin ang laser eh.
Yes,
So
kasi
it's
meron
not
na
a toy
talagang
laser.
mga nag-design na ganyang klaseng laser ginagamit in anti-piracy activities, no? So medyo gray area pa ngayon itong paggamit ng laser because it's categorized as what is called a directed energy weapon. Okay? So yung laser in military terms, ginagamit yan before for targeting. Or to direct yung mga bombs, mga laser guided bombs, no? Tapos recently, ayan nga, using more powerful lasers, they were able to devise these things that can discourage, say, pirates and induce temporary blindness on people operating boats, no, to discourage them from approaching a vessel.
Okay, so
And then the more intense lasers are the ones that can burn through things na.
okay, so Professor, I'll seize upon the word that you use. It is basically then, if not the weapon itself, it is part of the weapons system. And so take us to what you're saying, which is a trend that you're noticing. So if this was it is treated as a weapon, the fact that it was pointed at and directed at a vessel that we own, that does in fact count as an aggressive action?
Well, for me, it does, no? Kasi you also have to look at the context. This is a weapon. It was used in a situation which was preceded by this standard warnings na nila. Halos kabisado ko na tuloy yung mga warnings nila, no? Which always imply na it ends with them saying that you will bear the consequences if if you do not comply, you will bear the consequences. And then in addition to the warning, that is followed up by dangerous maneuvering, no? And dangerous maneuvering means setting up a collision. In the old days, before torpedoes were invented, ramming and basically deliberate collision was an acceptable means of attacking a vessel. No? That was before cannons became more powerful. Kasi that was on mga 18th, 19th century. And then you have it being done against a government vessel, no, not a private vessel. Kasi if it were a private vessel, maybe they will claim it's law enforcement action. But this is a government vessel, no? So it's an action against a state, bale. The state involved being the Philippines, an action by a Chinese government vessel against a Philippine government vessel. That makes it a state-to-state interaction. And for me, that already crosses the line, no? That it is clearly a threat of the use of force that is contrary to international law, particularly the principles of the UN Charter, no? Against acts of aggression and the use of force.
Well, Professor, ang magagawa lang natin yan is to file another note verbal at nagreklamo na nga daw, nagprotesta na si DND Secretary Carlito Galvez. But in the meantime, may proposal from Japan. Dumating na si President Marcos yesterday from his official visit. Nagpo-propose ang Japan and we are exploring yung visiting forces agreement. And Japan is eyeing a tripartite agreement. Sabi ni President Marcos kanina, open siya sa BFA, but yun daw, security triad should not provoke tension in the South China Sea. What do you think of those statements from the President?
Well, una yung the idea of entering into an agreement to strengthen ties with Japan, for me that is really in the cards naman, given how China has been really acting very belligerently and even directly against Japan, no, in the East China Sea. And for many decades, Japan naman has been supporting us, no, by providing assistance and equipment to the Coast Guard, no, ships, vessel or radars, no, and training. Tagal na talaga binibigyan tayo ng Japan. So it makes sense that this will level up, given the intensifying actions of China, which go against our interests as well as Japan's interests. No? Now, as for a security triad emerging, no, and it not being provocative, I don't accept that entering into alliances in itself, no, should be considered as provocative, no. Ang provocation talaga dapat is actual kinetic action, no? In this instance, malinaw naman na yung mga provocative actions are being undertaken by China itself, no? Kaya nga tayo napipilitang mag-consider ng mga ganitong alliances is because of Chinese activities against us. So, wag silang maninisi na provocative yung gagawin natin when in the first place, sila nga yung dahilan kung bakit tayo napilitang mag-enter into those types of agreements.
Halimbawa mag-security triad at mag-joint patrols lang. O yung tatlong bansa, will that be considered provocative? O inevitable na nasa China na yon, di ba, to appreciate the activities?
Well, a patrol in itself, again, is not provocative. Just because just because a police car passes by your street does not necessarily mean anything, di ba? So we should treat it that way as well, no? In the first place, again, sila nga yung dahilan kung bakit napunta tayo sa ganitong situation that we are now even considering joint patrols. We've already tried what they kept saying before, na cooperation, consultation, discussions, bilateral discussions, and what do we get? Lasers in our face, di ba? So, wag silang magko-complain if we end up turning around and saying na, okay, we don't feel safe with you, we feel safer with our friends. And we want to use our waters, we want to patrol our waters with our friends, not you.
Prof, but if there's something more concerning than the laser show earlier this month, I suppose it should be yung nangyari ng August with the BRP Magbanue, when the same Chinese vessel, the same Chinese Coast Guard vessel, uncovered its 70 millimeter cannon. I mean,
Yes.
how would anybody, or how should anybody react to that when somebody's bearing down on you and uncovering its cannons?
Kaya nga it's again part of that trend nga of escalation that I mentioned. Uncovering the cannons, and actually ang alam ko, this has already happened twice, no, not just that one. There is a video floating on YouTube where that was done against a vessel of the DAB FAR, no. So it has already taken place before. This was last year. Okay. So that is also, under the circumstances for me, already a threat of the use of force.
Yeah.
Kasi lang, hindi nila nire-reveal before, no? The government was
parang
keeping quiet
nag-unholster ng baril.
Pakita ng baril, oh.
Oo. Parang pinapakitaan ka ng baril para mag-back off ka, no? With the laser, parang tinutukan ka na rin, no? Hindi lang pinakitaan, tinutukan pa.
Yes, sir. Pero sir, I wonder about yung August event nga, yung pagpapakita ng 70 millimeter cannon nila. Do we know how we reacted to that and whether we filed a protest against that? And if we did, was that enough given what happened then and what is happening pa rin now?
Well, siyempre, the details are what are contained in the statement of the Coast Guard. No? I guess they don't want to, reveal too much information. Baka maging masyadong inflammatory. I don't know. No? But the basic facts are there. Talagang the same pattern na in-approach sila, blinak sila, binigyan ng warning, and then pinakitaan itong kanilang cannons at close range. No? So, very clearly a threat. For me, no. As to what happened next, ang nabalitaan ko is that it was reported, but the government leadership at that time, I guess, did not want to do anything about it.
Professor, more and more, and almost exclusively, this is becoming Coast Guard to Coast Guard. We take note also that here in the Philippines, there's a lot of more explicit talk about raising the capacity as well of our Coast Guard, refining its mandate also in terms of securing our borders. But does it still matter now? White ships, gray ships? I mean, between how Beijing and Manila would now frame their Coast Guards, does it still matter at this point the nature and the mandate of Coast Guards, especially given, as we said, rounding back to the start of my question, that halos lahat ngayon ng makiskisan Coast Guard to Coast Guard?
Well, una yung sinasabi nilang Coast Guard to Coast Guard. I think time has shown na it doesn't really matter at this point, no? Kasi for one thing, yung Coast Guard sa China is directly under the control of the Central Military Commission. So they're clearly a military service, and they act in accordance with military orders, and they're coordinated with military movements talaga. Second, yung importante dito is not the color of the ship. It's not whether it's white or gray. No, that is not in itself provocative or escalatory. It's what they do, no? So kahit ba Coast Guard yan, pero gagamitan nila ng kanyon o kaya ng laser yung ating mga tauhan, that is still an action attributable to the Chinese government because it is an official government vessel, no? Yun dapat ang titignan natin, hindi yung kulay, no? And therefore our responses should also be framed in the same manner, no? And we should really call them out na this is really already a threat of the use of force yung ginagawa nyo. For all of your statements, for all of their statements that they want to resolve these issues peacefully through negotiations and find win-win solutions, this is all proving that those statements, those positions are just covers, just shams, no? While they keep on doing aggressive actions, no? Assertive actions against us.
Sir, I suppose that we were... Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hindi, sige, kung tutuloy niya, mag-iiba ko ng konti ng topic.
Sige. Sundutin ko lang yan. Sir, kasi after the President's visit to Beijing last month, I suppose people were hoping na siguro naman meron ng kahit paano meeting of minds, meron ng hotline na itatayo for faster communication, and so on down the line. But what does this prove to us? So what does this event show us? What do we learn from this?
There's already an existing hotline between Coast Guards. 2017 pa yun, announced pa yun nung time ni President Duterte. No? And despite that supposed existing hotline, they still do this. So another announcement of another hotline at a higher level or at a different level, I really cannot give any credence that it will be of any use. No? Given our experience now with an existing hotline, no, and since 2017, and yet all of these incidents still took place. No?
Yes, sir. Well, sir,
And besides, if we look at the recent incident between China and the US, they had a hotline. And again, nobody was answering.
Yes, sir. Well,
Ayun
sir,
ang itatanong ko, Professor, yung China and US naman, because just within the month, merong mga bagong apart from maritime encounters, umaakit na tayo, nasa aerospace na tayo, nakakaapat ng objects na shot down by US fighter jets na although yung tatlo, hindi pa ina-acknowledge na made in China, no? Pero yung una tinanggap na nila na kanila ngayon, the high altitude balloons. Paano pag nagpadala nun dito over the Philippines, kung ma-detect man natin, will we consider that a provocative act?
It's already happened, di ba? Last year, November,
Pangasinan.
yung airship that was sighted off Pangasinan, that nobody admitted to be the owner, no? Pero based on the configuration, it's either Chinese or American naman. Well, unfortunately, yung existing assets natin do not have the capability to reach that high, no? Yung mga altitudes ng mga balloons na to, which is already in near space between 18 to 60 kilometers high.
Yes.
The only thing we can do in those instances really is, yun nga, again, call them out as protest, call them out as what they are, no, which is violations of the territorial sovereignty or in the airspace of the Philippines. That's the only thing we can do at this point, no? Whether or not we should seek the assistance of our allies to, say, shoot them down or whatever other actions, no? We'll have to see whether there are any assets available to do that, and whether it will be of any use. No?
How much do we know about these high altitude balloons? Kasi sinasabi nila pang weather lang daw eh. Pero ang iniimbestigahan ngayon pwede ba siyang halimbawa pang-hack ng systems? Of course, surveillance pwede, no? Pero yun nga, pwede ba siyang makasira ng mga systems natin, digital systems natin, kung sakasakali?
Siyempre, at this point, we don't know, no? But what we do know is that China, for all of its ingenuity and innovation, they have shown that they are capable and willing to apply things, take something and apply it for a totally different purpose that people don't expect, no? And they're very good at that, no? Ganun yung innovative edge nila, no? And that's why it's a problem, because things that we assume are used for like normal purposes or peaceful purposes, somehow nagagamit nila, nako-convert nila into other uses, no? Even military uses. So I wouldn't be surprised if these balloons can also bring aloft equipment or payloads that can do those kinds of things.
Pero sir, I'm wondering lang kasi kung what advantage would anybody get out of these balloons that they cannot get from using, for example, satellites that are flying over the Earth, or that are in orbit over the Earth? For example, transmissions, ganun ba? Kasi
Well,
diba, you have cameras that can zoom in from the satellites, but I don't know if they can also capture transmissions.
Yeah, well, of course they can. The advantage of a balloon is that it's slow, no? So it can linger for a longer time. So some operations, you might want to have that capability of being able to stay on station for very long. Yung satellite kasi, they're moving very fast. So they're only above a certain place for like maybe minutes, no, at times, depending on the nature of the orbit. a balloon can linger around your airspace for much longer because it can be so slow.
Or to that point, I mean, talking about, again, the patterns, the trends here, do you also subscribe to the theory that this was, in fact, the value was not even in its capacity, maybe its value was precisely in being seen?
Which one? The balloon?
The balloons.
Well, I don't think they expected it to be seen and noticed, actually, no? And I tend to believe reports that, number one, they actually did not control or lost control of this thing. And number two, they did not expect the issue to pop up at this point in time when they were, kumbaga, minamasahin na nila yung mundo that things were okay between them and the US, di ba? After the Biden-Xi meeting. And there was supposedly next a meeting of the defense ministers. No? Tapos nasira yon. So the whole show was ruined by this incident. No? So because of that, I think that I don't think it was really that deliberate. No? Even if perhaps if it was conducting surveillance, that would have been deliberate. But I don't think they expected it to become such a big issue.
Sir, papalang ako, I don't know if you'd find this a funny question, pero hanggang saan ba ang limit ng territory natin when it comes to airspace? I suppose kasi outer space is already beyond our airspace, so anybody can just fly over you in outer space. Pero until where or until how high is an airspace? Under international law, under aerospace law, that actually is not yet settled, yung boundary between airspace, near space, and outer space. It's an ongoing debate. Ang klaro lang is that your airspace starts at 12 nautical miles from your land territory. No? It coincides with your territorial sea. But vertically, there's a debate as to what is that boundary. Some countries like Australia put the boundary at what they call the Kármán line, around 100 kilometers. Whereas other countries argue na hindi, it should be the point at which airplanes will no longer work because the air is too thin. That's around 18 kilometers high. But then there are other people who say, no, it should be at that point where there is still some trace of the atmosphere, which would put it at maybe around 50 kilometers. So hindi pa nagkakasundo yung international community as to that, no? As to that vertical limit. So maybe that's something to be resolved in the future pa. Interesting. Okay, interesting, sir. Maraming salamat for joining us tonight. Ang ating suke, si Professor J. Batong Bakal.
Salamat, sir.
Thank you, Professor.
We're starting
Good evening,
yes, sir.
everyone.
Thank you, sir. Yan po. We're starting up another conversation after this breather, so keep it here in One News.
President Bongbong Marcos is open to having a visiting forces agreement with Japan. The chief executive said he would support a military access agreement with Tokyo if such move will not raise tensions in disputed waters.
House Speaker Martin Romualdez says that a visiting forces agreement between the Philippines and Japan could still be pursued in the long run. Romualdez says that pursuing a VFA with Japan can be considered a work in progress.
Pangulo Pangulong Bongbong Marcos sa aminadong nag-iingat na hindi magdulot ng tensyon sa China ang posibleng visiting forces agreement natin sa Japan.
Now, there is also we have to be careful also because we do not want to appear provocative. Parang imbis na pinapakalma natin ang sitwasyon sa South China Sea, ginagawa natin mas magiging mainit, di ba? That's not what we want.
There is a proposed visiting forces agreement between the Philippines and Japan. Could this pave the way for a Quad security cooperation that would include the United States and Australia? And how will China respond if all of this materializes? We now speak with Senate Foreign Relations Committee Vice Chairman Francis Tolentino. Good evening, Senator. Welcome back to Chiefs.
Evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good
Evening,
evening, ma'am. Good
Senator.
evening. Happy Valentine's Day. Good evening, sir.
Advance, happy Valentine's
Happy
po sa inyo.
Valentine's.
Sir, let me seize on two things that were discussed here. One is there's a proposal for a VFA with Japan, but at the same time, President Marcos saying, I'll be open to this so long as it doesn't raise tensions with China. So on both sides, do you think that's possible for us to consider and be open to a VFA with Japan that, on the other hand, does not raise tensions with China?
Well, the very purpose of a VFA or any security agreement for that matter is to promote peace, not to incite war or aggression. So the purpose is to have regional security and peace within a region. So I don't think it will amount to an act of titillating the other side, that what the Philippines is doing is near aggression. But if you consider the backdrop of this, there is an existing VFA in the United States, there is an existing VFA with Australia. So it's a done agreement, so to speak. I don't think that it should be seen as harnessing the drums of war. But I think it should be seen as in the context of promoting safety and stability in the region, maintaining balance of power, etc., etc.
But let me take on something that you said. Sabi nyo nga po, we have to take into consideration the current backdrop, the current context.
Yes.
And gaya ko nga sabi nyo, may agreement naman with US, that's in place. May agreement with Australia,
Yes.
and so on.
Which we have forgotten.
Yes, but if we are going to... Yes, but if we are going to take in the context, part of the current context also is existing rin yung tensions with China.
Yes, but you cannot say that to diffuse the tension is to do nothing. To diffuse the tension would mean that either you do not do anything or you do something that would positively diffuse the tension. So whatever perception the other side has, what matters is our national interest.
Yes,
so this is circuitous, but then again, the main purpose of this and the previous agreements and the existing agreements would be to promote safety and stability in the region.
Yes, sir. Pero sir, the other context in dun, sir, is the fact that we're talking about a possible VFA with Japan, and at the same time, Japan has been at times at loggerheads with China over territorial seas as well.
Senkaku Island.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Of course, we're not saying that we're against a VFA with Japan. What we're asking is whether or not you think this could possibly raise tensions with China, and should it matter to us in considering a possible VFA with Japan?
It matters to us because we lack the capacity, we lack the resources, we lack the wherewithals to deal with our current problems relative to the West Philippine Sea. We lack the resources in dealing with in confronting calamities, disasters, etc., etc. So when you talk of resources, when you talk of global actions, I think it will come to that point that what we lack, others can provide, and what others provide can either increase tensions or can, as I've said, promote stability in the region. Look at what happened. Yeah, yes.
Senator, open naman daw si President Marcos to VFA with Japan, ano?
Yes.
And yung security triad na proposal, he's waiting for the details. Kaya lang ko sa kasakali that we work out a VFA with Japan. As Ed na nga mentioned, wala namang ganun kasing problema Australia with
It's
China. Kung tayo mag-VFA with Japan, should we exclude any joint activities, for example, between us and Japan sa area ng Senkaku? Pwede ba yun? Since it's mutual, di ba? Usually reciprocal yan.
The VFA is not, the VFA should not be, our VFA with Australia and the proposed VFA with Japan should not be read with the MDT of 1951 as the backdrop. So mutuality there is none of our concern. So what is relevant in the proposed VFA, although we have yet to read, but probably it would be similar to the Australian VFA, is the joint training exercises which can be conducted in the Philippines, which can be conducted in Canberra, as well as the transfer of technology, transfer of equipment, and the utilization of their forces when it comes to disasters.
Halimbawa, kung hihingi tayo ng equipment or I guess hihingi tayo from Japan because it's a high-tech country. Halimbawa, for detecting high-altitude balloons na nga kasi mukhang dumadami yung mga nakikitang mga unidentified objects na yan in the airspace of different countries. Will that be considered provocative?
I don't think so, because as early as 2011, government of the Philippines and government of Japan already signed a joint statement concerning the comprehensive promotion of strategic partnership, and it led to the delivery of 2 or 3 aircrafts coming from the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. So it's ongoing since 2011. That's been 12 years ago. And then there was another statement, joint statement, I think that was signed. So these things are happening for the last 12 years, and incrementally it fosters the mutual intention of both countries to secure peace in the region. So we disregard first the current tension between Japan and China in the Senkaku Island area. But for us, I think the collaborative efforts would not just lead to military exercise, but it would even lead to information exchange, capacity building, and maritime security, and a lot of other things. So I think what we lack, others can provide.
Okay.
As simple as that.
Sir Malinaw,
Provided by other friends.
Sir Malinaw naman po yung something that you always stress, that part of the objective here is peace building, part of the objective here is security. But if we could take it now purely in the context of China, and our relations with China. Just earlier, our guest was Professor J. Batong Bakal, and we were talking about this laser pointing incident. And he was saying that, the laser was military grade. The laser was in fact part of a weapon system, and therefore that was a weapon directly pointed at our. And he said this also that he also said that this is just part of a larger and very clear trend of China really using more overt provocative actions. Is there any other way that we should be handling this? Other than the usual note verbal, and how we should be approaching our relations with China, given these trends, and whether or not you would recognize that?
some would consider this as gray zone coercive activities. Some would consider this as bullying. Some would consider this as a symbol of our inability to assume an asymmetric stance. So all of this taken together is a diminution of our sovereignty. Di ba nakakahiya na paulit-ulit na lang yan? So again, last year I proposed joint patrols. Again, with friends helping us, with allies providing us equipment, with allies providing us the necessary wherewithal. I think there's nothing wrong. Do you think China would do that if there is a joint delivery of food supply going to Ayungin Shoal to replenish the food stocks of our soldiers billeted in the BRP Sierra Madre? Do you think the Chinese Coast Guard would do that? I don't think so. If we're aided by a Japanese vessel or a U.S. vessel or Australian vessel.
Yes, sir.
So
that's a good
it boils
point.
down to that. That's something there are things we lack.
Yes, sir.
And we cannot provide because of lack of resources. So again, it highlights the need for that incident, that February 6th incident
Yes, sir.
in the Ayungin Shoal, highlights the need for more collaborative efforts with our allies.
Yes, sir. That's a good point, sir. Pero conversely, would the Americans, would the Japanese, would the Australians risk joining us in a resupply, for example, of Ayungin Shoal?
That's part of the joint patrol. Do you remember that the Coast Guard was just there to assist the Navy supplying? So
Yes,
if another Coast Guard, part of the joint patrol, in an agreement to be formulated would join us, I think we will lessen that, and it will even allow fishermen near Bajo de Masinloc to fish freely. And it will likewise show the good faith of the Chinese Coast Guard and militia. If they allow that, it now promotes a status quo bordering on quote-unquote friendship, open lines of communications, etc., etc.
Yes, sir. Well, sir, the other incident of alarm apparently happened in August pa, but we're only learning about this now. The same Chinese Coast Guard ship that pointed the laser at our Coast Guard ship also uncovered its 70mm cannons and approached one of our Coast Guard ships in August of last year. And Dr. Batong Bakal was saying that's an act of aggression. It's like unholstering your gun and pointing it at somebody else. How should we have responded to that, sir? From your point of view.
What do you mean during that
Actually, sir,
instant?
I have two questions. Do we know how we responded to that nga pala to begin with? Because we're only learning about this now.
The response would be coming from the diplomatic front, the protests, etc., la communications with the. I don't think we can reach the commander of the Southern Theater Command of the Chinese military. So these are done in diplomatic political circles, but the reaction of our troops probably can be termed as correct. It's not a reaction of cowardice, but it's a natural reaction coming from a Coast Guard assisting the delivery of food supply. So it was a humanitarian mission. Although the act of aggression on the other side can be documented, can be termed as more than hostile, we leave that at this point, to the diplomatic arm of our government. So
Yes,
again, all of this will highlight the benefits, the mutual benefits of working together, either trilaterally or in unison with another. That's why I called it quote-unquote Quad, although there is another security arrangement called Quad in another area which involves India. So it just shows the need for cooperation amongst allies to have regional security. Ano pa ba yung gusto nating hingin? Ito na nga yun eh, hindi natin kaya mag-isa.
Senator, kung tinutukan tayo ng baril, can we also point a gun at them? Will we be
We
within
leave that to
our
the, we
right?
leave that to the discretion of our Coast Guard or Naval Commander. They're well trained for how to react. I
Kasi yung Chinese Coast Guard is under their military, di ba? That is a military act.
yes.
Okay.
As
And
part
sir,
of the bullying, it's similar to the cutting of the rope, which I
yes, sir.
exposed months ago.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And
Yun,
conversely, sir.
pinutol yung rope. Ganon, tama na yung reaction na yun. Ganon.
And sir, and conversely, sir,
Unless you would want to have a reciprocal reaction, which admittedly, while we can do, perhaps might not be that sustainable.
Yes. Okay.
Kasi sir, maraming laser na mabibili sa online. Hindi, malalakas ang mga laser sa online. Ha? I'm not kidding. Ha? May mga laser binibenta, surprisingly, binibenta, of course, made in China, na nakakasunog. Well, that's their claim.
The military grade yan. Pero Senator, you raised...
We still expect a lot of things similar to this that will happen in the future.
Senator, you raised the possibility of a quad, security quad. Are you going to formally propose this to Malacanang or the defense department?
It's out there in the open. I was the one, modesty aside, I was the one who proposed joint patrols involving not just the Philippine and U.S. Coast Guards, but all Coast Guards with similar intention of securing peace, stability in the region. So with the VFA of Australia in existence, there's no question with that. US, no question with that. The forthcoming VFA with Japan, I think the four leaders can just sit down and sign an agreement or communicate a joint statement that we're doing this to secure peace and stability in the region. But I mean, even if there's no statement, as long as that agreements are in place, it can be done.
Okay. Senator, sa nalabing natin na oras, pwede ba, ikabig lang ako ng konti. I just want to ask some things about, President Marcos said, charter change certainly not a priority for his administration. How do you expect that to be taken in Congress after 6 years of, from distraction to genuine resource being poured into it, to a lot of debates about charter change? President Marcos saying this, do you think, how will that be taken by both houses of Congress? Does this literally move it out of people's sights and so they could focus on other things? Or do you feel that there is still do you feel that there is still legitimate and substantial push for charter change from members of Congress?
Well, theoretically and constitutionally, Congress can act independently and should act independently. So we heard a while ago that the chair of the House Constitutional Amendments Committee, Congressman Rodriguez, will push the pencil, so to speak, in having his committee come up with a committee report. I don't know about his Senate counterpart, what the thinking of the Senate Committee on Constitutional Amendments, but again, it's for the executive, it's a matter of priority. We respect the decision. So we leave that to the members, the majority, both in the House and the Senate, on how they will react and show respect to the presidential inclination.
But realistically, if the president's support is important for charter change, hindi ba? We saw what happened during the previous administration when Rodrigo Duterte lost interest in the push for federalism, nawala na, nag-disappear na, di ba?
But I doubt if it is still federalism that they're thinking of right now. Yes. So let's see. Let's see. I'm not a chairman of the Constitutional revision committee. So I think they will sit down together and deliberate on this objectively.
Okay, Senator Francis Tolentino. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Ay, maraming salamat. Happy Valentine's Day again.
Happy
Valentine's Day po.
Thank you, Senator.
And that's all we have for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.